Hello students! Today we're going to learn about the modals. Now, modals are a class of auxiliary verbs that combine with the base form of a following verb to make a verb phrase. And these verb phrases have a wide variety of meanings. Now, the modal for auxiliaries are the following: can, could, will, would, may, might, should, and must. And then these three are phrases that act like modal auxiliaries: ought to, had better, and would rather. Now remember, the modals exist in one form. That means that they have no past or future tense. So we do not add s or ing form. So we will always use it in this way, in this writing. Now let's look at each modal individually and learn what the meaning is. First, let's look at the modal auxiliary can. Now the negative form of can is can't or cannot. We use this modal auxiliary in three different ways. First, we can use can to express physical or intellectual ability, either in the present or future time. For example, we would say, he can swim very fast. Here we are saying that he has the ability, the physical ability to swim. So he can swim. We can also use can to ask permission. You can go to the movies this afternoon if you want to. Here, can expresses that this person, you, are allowed to or have permission to go to the movies. So you can go. And the final way we can use can is to express possibility or likelihood. We could say, we don't recommend planting this tree close to your house because this species can reach a height of 100 feet. Here, can shows the possibility of the tree, of this tree, to grow a height of 100 feet. It may grow 100 feet or it might not. So we use can to describe the possibility of this happening. Perfect. Now let's look at the next modal auxiliary. The next modal auxiliary we are going to learn how to use is could, couldn't. Now, could and couldn't can also be used in three different ways. First, it expresses physical or intellectual ability in the past. Remember, can expresses physical or intellectual ability in the present or the future, whereas could expresses it in the past. We would say, when I was young, I couldn't understand when people spoke English. So here we are saying that in the past, I could not understand English. It shows intellectual ability. The second is that it expresses ability in a conditional or unreal sense. For example, you could play the piano really well if you would practice. Here, could expresses that if you did this following part, this conditional sentence, then you could play the piano. So you can only play the piano if you fulfill this second part of the sentence, the conditional or unreal sense. Okay, and the last way we can use could, couldn't is in a polite request. So we can ask, could you tell me the time, please? As you can see, we use could as the polite way to request something. Could you pass me that notebook, please? For example. Okay, let's look at the next modal auxiliary. The next modal auxiliary we are learning is will and won't. We use will and won't to express confident expectation in simple futurity. So for example, the train will arrive in New York at 7:45. Here we use will to show that we are confident and we expect the train to arrive at this time, 7:45. We can also use it to express willingness in the present or future time. For example, My son will meet you at the airport. Here we are showing that my son is willing to meet you at the airport, either in the present or in the future. We can also use will in this with willingness, with this meaning, to ask for help. For example, will you help me finish my homework? Here we are expressing to ask you if you want to help me finish my homework. Will you help me finish my homework? Perfect. And the last way we can use will or won't is with formal commands. So we can say, employees will report for work at 9 a.m. or employees won't show late to their shift. What we are showing here is that they have to. It is a rule for them to follow, that they must report for work at 9 a.m. Okay, let's look at the next modal auxiliary. Now the modal auxiliary would, wouldn't, has 5 different meanings it can express. Let's start with the first one. It can express futurity with reference to a past verb. So for example, he said that he would arrive the next day. It can also express willingness in the past. My son said he would meet me at the airport. Here in this sentence, it is similar when we looked at the modal auxiliary will, except that in this case, would is used to express the past. Now the third way we can use would is with a polite request. So we can ask, would you open the door for me, please? Here we use would to ask a question about a request. We can also use it to express contemporary reality. I would come to see you if I had time. Here, this sentence is expressing that the person, the subject, would come to see them if they had time. So this expresses a reality that cannot happen. Lastly, it can express habitual actions in the past. When John was a student, he and his friends would often sit up all night discussing politics and philosophy. Here you see that would is used to talk about John's habitual actions in the past. So John, when he was a student, used to stay up all night discussing politics and philosophy. But now that he is no longer a student, he does not do this habitual action. So would is used to describe habitual actions in the past. Okay, now let's go on to the next modal auxiliary. The modal auxiliary may or may not only has 2 different meanings it can have. First, it can express permission in a formal style. For example, may I see the director in his office now, please? Here, may is used to ask permission to do an action. It can also express possibility or probability, either in the present or the future. For example, I may see my boyfriend this afternoon. Here we are saying that the subject of the sentence may see or has the possibility of seeing their boyfriend this afternoon. Okay, let's go on to the next modal auxiliary. The auxiliary might and might not is very similar to may. We also use it to express permission or possibility, but in the past. For example, he might have bought a cake. We can also use it to express possibility in the present or future. So this is very similar to may. We would say, I don't allow my daughter to go on the bus alone because she might get lost. Remember, might is similar to may, but it is more common to use may in everyday speech. Might is seen as a very formal way of asking questions or giving an answer. Now let's look at the next modal auxiliary. The modal auxiliary should, shouldn't can be used to express obligation, duty, advisability in the present or future. Now remember, With should, shouldn't, it is very similar to ought to. These can express a range of degree of advisability. It can either be just a suggestion or it can be a command, an obligation, something that has to be done. For example, you should study harder or you ought to study harder. Both these sentences have the same meaning and they are suggesting you to study harder. So it is a suggestion. So low level of obligation. Now the following sentences. Drivers should obey the speed limit. Drivers ought to obey the speed limit. These are an obligation. These have to be followed. So these show a high level of duty or a high level of advisability. So high. As you can see, should and ought to can be used interchangeably. Now let's look at our final modal auxiliary. The last modal auxiliary we will be learning in this lesson is must or mustn't. Now must or mustn't is used to express necessity or a strong obligation. For example, a soldier must always follow orders. Here it shows that must is something that has to be done. It is an obligation, a duty. Now, remember, must has no past form. So we cannot use must to describe an action in the past. Past necessity in main clauses is expressed by have to, not by must. So for example, with must we would say, the doctor told Bill he must stop eating sweets. If we want to say the sentence in the past form, we use have to. So we would say, Bill had to stop eating sweets. Perfect. Thank you for listening.